In the town of Humble, Texas, there lived a peaceful family of four: Don Murphy and Mary Ann Murphy, along with their son Scott and daughter Kelly. On the surface, this was just an ordinary American family like any other. Mary Ann Murphy was the epitome of a small-town girl, honest, resilient, and kind-hearted. In contrast, Don was a typical bad boy, rebellious, impulsive, and somewhat rough around the edges. Perhaps it was these opposite personalities that attracted them to each other, and together they built this small home. After leaving school, Mary Ann dedicated herself to local public safety work, while Don became a skilled mechanic. Though they weren't a wealthy family, their life was stable and happy. Until that fateful day of July 16, 2012. Around 1 a.m., the 911 dispatch center received a panicked emergency call. The caller was Kelly, the family's 16-year-old daughter. Her voice trembling with fear, Kelly told the dispatcher that a stranger had violently kicked down the back door to break into their house. What the young girl heard next was horrifying. Her mother's desperate cries for help, followed by silence, then agonizing screams of pain. Kelly confessed to the dispatcher that she was too terrified to go to her mother's room to check the situation, and instead ran to a neighbor's house to call for help. Upon receiving the report, the dispatcher immediately dispatched an emergency police response team to the scene. When they arrived, the scene confirmed Kelly's account. 2 glass windows in the backyard were completely shattered, and the back door was ajar in an unusual state. After carefully examining and confirming that the perpetrator had left the scene, the police began searching inside the house. In the bedroom, they found Mary Ann lying motionless, covered in wounds with no signs of life. At this point, many might wonder, wasn't this a family of 4? Where were the other 2 men? A strange coincidence was that both Don and Scott had to work night shifts. Don, working as a mechanic at a factory with 3 shifts, was scheduled for the night shift that evening. Scott, who worked at the airport, was also assigned to work the night shift. While the police were actively investigating the scene, Kelly had urgently contacted both her brother and father. Therefore, both rushed home immediately after receiving the news. However, Scott had barely set foot at home when he encountered a shocking scene. More than 20 police cars parked in front of the house. Immediately sensing the severity of the situation, the worried young man tried to rush into the house to find out what had happened. However, the police stopped him. What made Scott even more anxious was that no matter how much he pleaded or asked, the investigators remained resolutely silent, refusing to reveal any information about the situation inside the house. The extreme worry combined with being obstructed caused Scott to lose his composure, leading to a conflict with the police force. Finally, to control the situation, they had to restrain the young man with handcuffs. However, when the homeowner Don arrived home, the police's attitude was completely different. The commanding officer no longer concealed anything and straightforwardly informed him that Mary Ann had been brutally murdered by a killer. Attentive readers have surely noticed the abnormality in this different treatment by the police, right? The reason why they had different attitudes toward Scott and Don, I will explain more clearly later. First, let's learn about the victim's condition. The autopsy results showed that Mary Ann had been stabbed a total of 73 times. This was clearly an attack far beyond what was necessary, demonstrating the perpetrator's deep hatred and desire to vent anger. Through investigation, police also discovered that Mary Ann had a hearing disability. One ear could not hear. When sleeping, due to her habit of lying on her side toward her normal ear, sometimes she could not hear sounds from outside at all. Analysis of the scene combined with Kelly's testimony showed that the perpetrator had acted boldly, smashing windows while kicking down the back door. If it were simply a thief wanting to break in and steal property, they would never make such loud noises. More importantly, all blood traces were concentrated only in the master bedroom, proving that after breaking in, the perpetrator had a clear target, going straight to Mary Ann. Combined with the strange coincidence that both men in the house were absent, all signs pointed to one conclusion. The perpetrator was very likely someone familiar with the family, and this was a carefully planned case. Although it sounds shocking, crime statistics reveal a painful truth. In the vast majority of family murders, the perpetrator is usually a family member. It was for this reason that police applied the tactic of separately interrogating each member, observing reactions and looking for contradictions in testimonies. One notable detail was Don's reaction when he received the devastating news. Instead of showing grief or shock as would be normal, he displayed unusual calmness. However, after listening to Kelly's detailed testimony, police began to relax their suspicions of the two men in the family. According to the girl's account, when the incident occurred, she was sleeping soundly in her own room and was awakened by her mother's tragic screams. Kelly described hearing Marianne calling for help continuously, but as she had informed the dispatcher, fear had taken over her entire body, making it impossible for her to dare leave her room to check the situation. Importantly, throughout this process, Kelly also heard an unfamiliar male voice shouting fiercely, "Shut up!" So why didn't she report this directly at the time? Because her phone was with Marianne, not on her person. In fact, Kelly had hidden until there was no more movement outside before daring to run to the neighbor's house to report. The reason Kelly's testimony reduced suspicion of the two men in the house. First, that "shut up" was clearly not her brother's or father's voice. Second, and most importantly, Kelly might know who the perpetrator was. In fact, when she went to the neighbor's house to report, she had seen a piece of paper. So she unconsciously picked up that paper. Only after finishing her report did Kelly discover there was writing on the paper. The content was her home address, along with Marianne's schedule of when she was home. Not only that, when police searched the scene, they also discovered a piece of paper. On it was written, "Good luck at court without your mother." The two pieces of paper combined made Kelly remember something. Sometime before, she had been driving when she collided with a man's car, causing a dispute. The court date was in a few days. The key point was that Kelly had felt the man looked familiar but couldn't remember where she had seen him. But now, triggered by her mother's death, she suddenly remembered. Once, she and her mother had gone to eat at a restaurant and had encountered this man. At that time, the man had intentionally or unintentionally stared at them intently. Kelly also added that in the days before, she had noticed a strange blue pickup truck driving back and forth in front of their house. However, due to the distance and limited viewing angle, she couldn't identify the driver. After hearing Kelly's testimony, police immediately shifted their investigation to the mysterious man she had mentioned. Theoretically, identifying this person should be quite simple. After all, he was about to face Kelly in court over the traffic collision, so his personal information would be available in the legal records. However, after conducting a deeper investigation, something unexpected happened. Instead of focusing on finding this mysterious man, the investigation commander suddenly reversed course, directing suspicion back toward the members of the victim's own family. This decision was based on several suspicious findings. First, let's recall the scene that police first encountered. Not only was the back door open, but the two glass windows on both sides were also completely shattered. At first glance, since the windows were too small for an adult to crawl through, police initially theorized that the perpetrator had smashed them to reach inside and unlock the back door from within. However, when they measured in practice, they found the distance from the windows to the door handle was too far, forcing the intruder to use force to kick down the door. This seemed to fit perfectly with Kelly's testimony. However, when investigating deeper, police discovered some clear suspicious points. For example, they found the brick used to smash the windows inside the house. According to everyone, if someone outside threw a brick to smash windows, would the window glass fall inside the house or outside? It would certainly be more inside the house, right? But the actual situation was completely opposite. This meant the brick might have been thrown from inside the house outward, then brought back inside. The purpose was to create the illusion that it was thrown from outside in. Additionally, objects that had been neatly arranged on the kitchen table were all scattered on the floor. The problem was, as mentioned above, from many signs it appeared the perpetrator had targeted Marianne directly. So why was it necessary to make the kitchen chaotic? Unsurprisingly, this was again creating the illusion of a burglary. Finally, regarding the mysterious man. Through investigation, the traffic accident Kelly mentioned was not serious. The related economic dispute was also not large. there was absolutely no need to commit murder over this matter. If the case were really related to the mysterious man, would it be necessary to leave 2 pieces of paper to draw suspicion toward himself? Clearly, this was unreasonable. Conversely, the perpetrator's attempt to redirect suspicion toward outsiders actually increased the likelihood that this was an inside job. Based on criminal investigation principles, those who try hardest to blame others are most likely to be the real perpetrators themselves. With this reasoning, the case commander decided to expand the investigation, digging deep into the past and present of each member of Marianne's family, including husband Don, son Scott, and daughter Kelly. The results revealed that in his youth, Don had been a notorious local thug. Although with age and family responsibilities, Don had mellowed considerably. Neighbors and old friends still described him as a ticking time bomb. They believed Don had serious problems controlling his emotions, frequently in a state of tension, as if ready to explode at any moment. More worryingly was the marital situation between Don and Marianne. According to gathered information, the couple had been at odds for quite some time, even sleeping in separate rooms. Combined with the life insurance issue, a classic motive in spouse murder cases, along with Don's cold, emotionless reaction when hearing of his wife's death, everything made police suspicious. However, Scott, the son in the family, spoke up in defense of his father. He insisted that Don was simply a man who didn't know how to express emotions, but his love for Marianne was real and deep. Scott firmly rejected any suspicion that his father could be involved in his mother's death. Of course, a son's defense could not convince experienced investigators. They understood that in this work, one cannot rely solely on words to eliminate suspicion of anyone. However, after a long period of meticulous investigation, police had to admit they could not find any concrete evidence or clear motive to charge Don Murphy. Just when the investigation seemed to hit a dead end, police discovered a new suspicious point, and this time the arrow of suspicion turned toward a completely unexpected person, Kelly herself. The reason police began to suspect Kelly was quite simple but very important: the inconsistency in her testimony. Those who are observant will notice that the story Kelly told about the sequence of events had changed with each retelling. Specifically, when calling 911, she said she heard someone kicking down the front door, then heard her mother calling for help. However, when police arrived at the scene to interrogate her, she changed her story, saying she was sleeping soundly and was awakened by her mother's screams. Initially, police had noticed this contradiction. However, they thought this might just be a consequence of psychological trauma. A 16-year-old girl witnessing such a tragedy could completely suffer from temporary memory disorder. But a detail from a neighbor's testimony made them change their perspective. This neighbor insisted they also heard the sound of breaking glass from the Murphy house. What was noteworthy was that just a few dozen seconds after that sound, they saw Kelly running to their house for help. This itself was strange enough. Even stranger was that when police arrived at the scene, Marianne's blood was almost completely dry. When police asked Kelly about this, she was completely unable to explain, only saying she remembered incorrectly. During the investigation, police discovered an unusual detail. Kelly actually still had a phone with her, and this device had clearly been used for quite some time before. This meant Kelly's previous testimony, that the phone was with her mother so she had to run to the neighbor's house to call police, was not true. If she had a phone, why didn't she use it immediately to call 911? When asked, Kelly explained that her mother, Marianne, would frequently confiscate her daughter's phone under various pretenses. Therefore, she had secretly prepared a second phone. The reason she didn't use this device to call police, according to Kelly, was because she was afraid of revealing its existence and having it confiscated by her mother again. I don't know what others think of this explanation, but to the police, the more they asked, the more suspicions arose. In the end, Kelly herself felt she could no longer continue hiding with these patchwork lies. At one point, she suddenly admitted she knew the perpetrator, whose name was Jens Amode. All the previous lies were because she was threatened by Jens and feared he would retaliate. After deciding to confess, Kelly began recounting the entire actual sequence of events from that fateful night. According to her, Jens had not come alone, but with a man whose face was covered with a mask. These two, after breaking into the Murphy house, went straight to Marianne's bedroom to carry out the murder. After completing the main task, Jens found Kelly and threatened her extremely cruelly. He pulled out a knife and warned that if she dared reveal anything about this incident, Kelly would share her mother's fate. Before leaving, Jens also stuffed a pre-written piece of paper into Kelly's hand, ordering her to give it to police to direct suspicion toward the man in the traffic collision. So who was Jens Amadei, and why did he have a motive to kill Marianne? Through investigation, police gathered information about this 20-year-old young man. Jens and Kelly had known each other since high school. They were schoolmates and had maintained a relationship for 3 years. Throughout this time, Jens had always harbored hopes of dating Kelly, but all his attempts at confession were firmly rejected by the girl. The relationship between the two remained only at the level of ordinary acquaintances, but what puzzled police was the motive for the murder. If Jens was truly angry about being rejected by Kelly, then common logic would be that he would target the girl herself, not her mother. Why would he choose Marianne as his target? This irrationality made investigators suspect that Kelly was still hiding important details. To clarify the truth, they asked Don for permission to conduct a polygraph test on his underage daughter. Don agreed to this proposal, and the test results confirmed police suspicions. Kelly was still lying. The trouble was that Kelly was still a minor, so many methods couldn't be used. Because of this, police could only be patient, continuously guiding her, hoping to obtain some factual information. In fact, during the communication process, the person in charge discovered that the relationship between Kelly and her mother Marianne didn't seem very good. Kelly repeatedly mentioned that her mother was overly controlling, frequently criticizing her, leading to her being somewhat resentful of Marianne. So police directly used this as an angle of attack against Kelly. As a result, the girl changed her story about the day the crime occurred. Actually, before the crime happened, Kelly was grounded by Marianne, and her phone had also been confiscated. It was precisely because she was angry with her mother's behavior that Kelly called Jens to come. Initially, Kelly just wanted him to scare Marianne a little. How could she think her mother would be murdered? Kelly still doesn't understand why Jens did such a thing. Hearing this testimony, police felt it had more credibility. Being angry with one's mother and calling a friend for help was indeed very reasonable. As for why it ultimately developed into murder, only Jens could provide the answer. The result was interesting. Faced with police questioning, Jens said he and Kelly could only be called acquaintances, not even friends, much less talk about wanting to date her. Therefore, he also had no idea that Kelly's mother was Marianne. As for the case, he had no idea why police were looking for him. Moreover, on the night the crime occurred, he was always at home, and everyone could testify for him. Of course, all criminals initially deny the crimes they've committed. As for the alibi, since those who could testify for him were all family members, the credibility wasn't high. Second, the time the crime occurred was 1 a.m. when most people were sleeping. In fact, Jens's family could prove he didn't go out on the evening before the crime, but the next morning, he could have snuck out while everyone was sleeping to commit the crime. Who would know? Given this situation, police decided to have Jens take a polygraph test. Sure enough, he didn't pass. Fortunately, compared to Kelly, Jens was an adult, much easier to deal with. Finally, after 7 hours of high-intensity interrogation, Jens couldn't withstand the pressure and admitted everything. Just as Kelly had said, Jens received Kelly's call and came to the scene. The purpose was to help scare Marianne a little. Jens said that night he wore all black clothes and used a mask to cover his face, ensuring no one could recognize his identity. Moreover, he didn't drive his own car but had a friend drive him to the scene. Upon arrival, Kelly helped open the door. Then Jens went directly upstairs to Marianne's room, but unexpectedly, Marianne wasn't sleeping. Seeing someone enter, she immediately jumped out of bed screaming. This unexpected scene frightened Jens, so he unconsciously pulled out the knife he was carrying, wanting to make Marianne quiet. Who knew that when she saw the gleaming blade, Marianne not only didn't quiet down but screamed even louder. In the urgent situation to make her quiet, Jens rushed forward and stabbed 3 times, hitting her arm, stomach, and back, respectively. After that, Marianne gradually became still. At this stage, the case was nearly clear. Jens was prosecuted for murdering Marianne, while Kelly, as an accomplice, was also brought to trial. Initially, Kelly always insisted she only called Jens to scare her mother, but he took it upon himself to commit murder. In her thinking, she shouldn't bear heavy responsibility. However, when she learned she was also being prosecuted, Kelly completely refused to accept it, immediately changing her testimony, denying everything she had said before, insisting she had no idea what had happened. The problem was that Jens's and Kelly's testimonies had originally supported each other. If Kelly denied involvement, then Jens's testimony would also lose validity. While police were still trying to convince Kelly to face the truth, the prosecutor in charge of the case, Anna Emmons, discovered a series of abnormalities in the files. Specifically, while Jens's description of the crime's progression and Kelly's description seemed quite similar at first glance, they actually contained many important contradictions. In Kelly's testimony, she opened the back door for Jens to enter the house, while Jens insisted Kelly open the front door for him. Furthermore, Jens said that after entering the house, he went upstairs to Marianne's room, while the Murphy family house was only 1 story with no second floor at all. The most crucial point was that Jens only admitted to stabbing the victim 3 times, but in reality, Marianne had 73 stab wounds. So why would someone who had clearly admitted guilt lie about these details? The prosecutor determined that unless there was one reason, Jens was actually not the perpetrator. But if so, why would he confess to the crime? To find the answer, she asked police to reinvestigate the entire relationship and circumstances of the 3 people: Kelly, Jens, and Marianne. Surprisingly, this review brought a new discovery. When checking Marianne's phone, police discovered she had an extramarital relationship with a colleague. This was seen as an important breakthrough, because if Don, her husband, knew about this, it was very possible that in his rage, he had someone kill his wife. Thinking this way, police immediately sought out the secret lover for questioning. However, this person flatly denied the possibility that Don was involved. He insisted the relationship was extremely secretive and Don couldn't possibly know. This also made sense, because even the police in the initial investigation phase hadn't discovered this. Even so, investigators still wanted to use this information to test Don's reaction. The result was that he didn't waver at all and even decisively said, "You shouldn't waste time on me anymore. If you have time, you'd better go talk to a woman named Rebecca Keller." So who was Rebecca? Rebecca was 4 years older than Kelly, and the two had known each other for over a year. They called each other friends, but in reality they weren't just friends, they were lovers. However, Marianne completely disagreed with Kelly and Rebecca being together. Marianne's confiscation of Kelly's phone was also aimed at cutting off communication between the two. But feelings can't be stopped just by a prohibition. In fact, although Marianne had directly forbidden Rebecca from coming to the house, Kelly still took advantage of when her mother was away to call her over. Until one day, not long before the crime occurred, when Kelly and Rebecca were bathing together, Marianne suddenly came home and caught them. This scene made Marianne extremely angry. She demanded Rebecca leave immediately, but Rebecca firmly refused. The situation became so tense that Marianne had to call the police. Finally, Rebecca was charged with illegal trespassing and was forcibly removed from the Murphy house by police. Previously, Don had always firmly believed his daughter couldn't be involved in the case. But as the investigation went deeper and more new details emerged, he could no longer maintain that belief. Therefore, when advising police to find Rebecca, Don implied 2 things. First, Kelly was at a rebellious age, and it was hard for anyone to make her tell the truth. But if it were Rebecca who had special influence over Kelly, that might not be the case. Second, more directly, was the possibility that Rebecca was also involved in the case. Receiving this information, police immediately sought out Rebecca for questioning. Faced with the police's appearance, Rebecca appeared quite calm, insisting she hadn't contacted Kelly for over a month, implying she knew nothing about Marianne's murder. However, Rebecca didn't expect that this testimony not only didn't help her escape suspicion, but made police pay more attention to her. Because as mentioned, Marianne's confiscation of Kelly's phone was specifically to prevent her from contacting Rebecca. So what else could the second phone that Kelly secretly hid be for, other than contacting Rebecca? If Rebecca had been more careful with her words then, just saying she hadn't seen Kelly for over a month, police might have had to investigate further, but insisting on no contact for a month was completely a lie. In the second phone that Kelly secretly hid, police not only found countless messages and calls showing close contact between the two, but also discovered a more noteworthy detail. On the very night the murder occurred, just 3 minutes before Kelly ran to the neighbor's house to report to police, she had called Rebecca. When confronted directly, Rebecca admitted she hadn't told the truth before just because she didn't want to get into trouble. As for the call on the night of the crime, she explained that Kelly said her mother had been murdered and she was very panicked, but at that time Rebecca was working the night shift at the Crab Shack restaurant, so couldn't come find her. However, this explanation was quickly exposed. When police contacted the owner of Crab Shack restaurant, they said Rebecca had actually been fired 2 months before the crime occurred. When brought to the police station, Rebecca continued to change her testimony. This time, she said that sometime before the crime, Kelly had revealed to her that she was planning to do something. However, Kelly absolutely refused to say specifically what that plan was. Every time Rebecca tried to ask, the only answer she received was always, "I don't want you to get involved." It wasn't until the night the murder occurred that Rebecca understood what that plan was. As mentioned before Kelly ran to the neighbor's house to report to police, she had called Rebecca. When the phone was connected, Kelly said directly, "I did it." Rebecca asked back, "Did what?" And Kelly answered, "I killed my mother." Rebecca was so horrified she was nearly speechless. When she calmed down, she immediately told Kelly to go to the police station and confess, but Kelly firmly refused. After that, the situation gradually escalated to this point. My goodness, yet another completely new version of the story. Faced with two suspects who constantly changed their testimonies and were full of lies, police were completely at an impasse. In that situation, besides taking both for polygraph tests, they had almost no other choice. So what do you think the polygraph test results were? Surprisingly, they passed. Just when police thought they had finally grasped the truth, another new development appeared. Because Rebecca had previously lied continuously, police had to expand their investigation to her acquaintances to gather more information. And unexpectedly, when the polygraph results had just been confirmed on one side, on the other side, the investigation team reported a shocking lead. A young man named Martin testified that on the night the crime occurred, Rebecca had asked him to drive her to the residential area where Kelly lived, then wait in the car for about 20 minutes before driving her back. Martin agreed immediately. However, when he took Rebecca there, he had to wait over an hour before seeing her return. What was noteworthy was that Rebecca's face was pale at that time, looking panicked, continuously urging Martin to drive away as quickly as possible. Encountering such a strange situation, Martin naturally couldn't contain his curiosity, continuously asking what exactly had happened, why she was so frightened, and why they had to leave in such a hurry. Perhaps being asked to the point where there was no way to refuse, Rebecca blurted out directly, "I killed Kelly's mother, Mary Ann." At this stage, police didn't need to consider much more, immediately arresting Rebecca. Whatever the case, they'd bring her in and interrogate her slowly. But Rebecca updated her story faster than the investigation speed, and a completely new version appeared again. This time, she admitted to being present at the scene on the night the crime occurred, but insisted Mary Ann's death was not directly related to her. According to Rebecca, she only loved Kelly too much, so had listened to Kelly's request, coming to the scene to help clean up the aftermath. This included putting the murder weapon in a garbage bag, throwing it in the school dumpster the next day, and rearranging the scene to mislead the investigation. Everything, according to her, only went that far. So how did Kelly react to Rebecca's new testimony? She still firmly maintained the old scenario. The perpetrator was Jens. The logic Kelly wanted police to believe could be imagined like this. She asked Jens to come scare her mother, but Jens exceeded limits and committed murder. After that, Kelly called Rebecca to help erase traces. This way of speaking both matched Rebecca's testimony and helped Kelly reduce her responsibility to the minimum level. Because after all, Rebecca hadn't personally witnessed Kelly murdering her mother. However, by this time, police had extracted footage from surveillance cameras near Jens's residence and confirmed his alibi. In other words, Jens was completely unrelated to this case. Therefore, given the situation at that time, the perpetrator could definitely only be Rebecca or Kelly, but specifically who directly committed the act was still unclear. Therefore, police decided to arrest both. Kelly was arrested, but was soon bailed out by her family. Conversely, Rebecca, because of Martin's unfavorable testimony, had a higher level of suspicion directed at her, leading to her bail being denied. The problem was that faced with two professional liars, police still couldn't determine exactly who had killed Mary Ann. Since Jens was removed from suspicion, Kelly again changed her testimony, insisting Rebecca was the real perpetrator. Hearing this, many would think Kelly and Rebecca had broken up with each other. But in my opinion, this was a trick they deliberately used to confuse the investigation. Because if they had truly turned their backs on each other, both would certainly no longer be in contact. Reality was quite different. Since being bailed out, Kelly visited Rebecca in jail almost daily, talking on the phone as if nothing had happened. Actually, during the trial period, the court had banned the two from contacting each other. The reason Kelly and Rebecca could call each other like a young couple without restraint was because police deliberately allowed it. The purpose, everyone can probably guess, by wiretapping the two's conversations to find the truth of the case. Kelly and Rebecca, of course, knew they were being wiretapped, but people can't always be in a state of tension. Anything done for a long time will naturally become loose. It's just that the level of caution of these two girls still far exceeded police expectations. Investigators had wiretapped for 14 months, 800 phone calls. Fortunately, they finally got what they wanted. In one conversation, Kelly said, "You don't understand that feeling. I lost my mother, only my brother is left to rely on. Don't blame yourself anymore, this isn't your fault. Everything happens for a reason, you can't change God's arrangement. Moreover, you didn't see what I saw." Rebecca replied, "Actually, I did. I saw it with my own eyes." Although this conversation was still spoken in veiled terms, the meaning was all too clear. The person who directly killed Mary Ann was Rebecca. When police had this important evidence in hand, both Rebecca and Kelly understood that everything had come to an end. Both successively signed plea agreements, and it was these confessions that helped solve the final mystery of the case, the motive. Many still think the reason was simply that Mary Ann opposed their romantic relationship, but in reality, that wasn't the main reason. Recalling the investigation process, police had discovered Mary Ann had an extramarital relationship with a colleague. This person insisted Don, Mary Ann's husband, had no idea about it, partly because Mary Ann had rented a house outside to avoid her alcoholic husband, rarely sleeping at home. This also meant Rebecca and Kelly had plenty of time to be together, only needing to temporarily avoid each other when Mary Ann came home. There was absolutely no reason to kill someone over a love affair. The real motive was that in the second phone, Kelly had taken many intimate photos with Rebecca. These photos apparently had fallen into Mary Ann's hands. Since Kelly was still a minor, Rebecca feared Mary Ann would accuse her of child abuse. This fear led the two to plan Mary Ann's murder together to cover their tracks. Finally, Rebecca was sentenced to 60 years in prison, while her girlfriend Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in prison. From a relationship that was opposed, they had turned into cold-blooded criminals just to protect their secret. The story is a bitter reminder that when emotions are led by fear and selfishness, the consequences can destroy not only others' lives, but one's own as well. And that's today's case. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next videos.